This segment is brought to you in part by the Canadian Historical Arms Society, owners of the Genesee Range, the premier recreational sport and training facility in Western Canada. See us online at historical-arms.com.
The Quiet Professional, a podcast about law enforcement, security, justice, and politics. We are digging deeper on the issues and going where the information takes us with access to experts and authorities. Welcome to The Quiet Professional. Hey everybody, welcome back. Nathan Rome is with you. Today we've got a very unique topic. I haven't had this on here yet. We're going to be talking about excited delirium and in-custody deaths, and also some of the public and political responses to these topics. For that, I've got a couple people in the room with me. First is my co-host, John Simpson. He is an instructor of law enforcement and military, as well as a research historian. John is also a published author of several books on the topics of training. I'll get those links up when we put this episode up, so you can check those out. And our subject matter expert for the day is going to be Dr. John G. Peters. Dr. Peters is the president and chief learning officer at the Institute for the Prevention of In-Custody Deaths, Incorporated. He is a former administrator of a medium-sized police department, a police officer, and deputy sheriff. Dr. Peters is the author of more than 300 publications and is a judicially qualified expert witness. In addition to his undergraduate criminal justice degree from the University of Baltimore, Dr. Peters holds 4 graduate degrees, which includes a Ph.D. in applied management and decision sciences. So welcome to both of you.
Well, thank you, Nathan. It's a pleasure to be here. Always good to be back.
Maybe for clarity's sake, I'll call you Dr. Peters. I know you said call you John, but we got 2 Johns in here. So I'll say Dr. or Dr. Peters so people know and they can associate your voice. But yeah, no, I want to start with just talking a bit about you and how you got into talking about excited delirium. What kind of drew you into this realm? Because I don't know of any other experts in this, but it's definitely a thing that we see out there, that we hear of. So, how did you get into this?
Well, I got into it sort of an unusual way. Back in the late 1980s, I was conducting a literature review for a handcuff book that I later had published called Tactical Handcuffing for Chain and Hinge Style Handcuffs. And I was wrapping up the literature review on that. I was in Seattle and someone told me about a gentleman named Dr. Donald Ray, who had been doing some research on positional asphyxia. So I went and personally met with Dr. Ray, and out of that, he had mentioned something about excited delirium. So I started to do another literature review on excited delirium. And that kind of put me into the whole area of this phenomenon, because a lot of the people who officers meet in the field who are acting really bizarre and have incredible strength and nothing seems to work on them ultimately wind up in the prone position. And as a result of some of those, people die. And there's been a lot of research done, a lot of scientific as well as clinical research out in the field done on prone restraint and positional asphyxia. But almost all of that loops back to some type of bizarre behavior where the officers had to put the person on the ground, and sometimes people die.
Well, and you know what? Positional asphyxia. So can you just explain, maybe for people who aren't law enforcement, how you would classify that or what it is?
Sure. Positional asphyxia is a term that migrated from the medical community into the law enforcement community, primarily by Dr. Donald Ray in Seattle. And he did a very, very limited study, which ultimately was disproven scientifically, and to which he admitted he had errors when he took the court in a San Diego, California use of force case. But positional asphyxias, there's many types, but the ones that law enforcement primarily deal with. Number one, positional asphyxia simply means that the body is put into a position that compromises breathing. And we see that many times when people in nursing homes or similar environments fall through the slats of a bed or fall and their neck gets twisted against the wall. We have evidence of that in law enforcement where people have been very intoxicated and tried to move from the front seat to the back seat of a car and got wedged in between the floorboard and the seat, and they just couldn't continue breathing because of the position they were in. And more importantly, for law enforcement, there is another position called compressional asphyxia. And compressional asphyxia is, again, where the person is put into usually a prone position, sometimes supine, they're on the back, and too much weight is applied to the chest or the back area, which compromises breathing. Now, the research is fairly clear on a lot of this, that you can put too much weight on a person's back, but it is going to be on a case-by-case basis. For example, if I weighed 200 pounds and I put my knee on the back of a 6-month-old, I would probably kill that 6-month-old because of the compression. The baby wouldn't be able to breathe. If I put my back on someone who's 240 pounds, probably wouldn't do a thing. And the research, the clinical research, the stuff that's been done in the field, notably by Dr. Darrell Ross, formerly with Valdosta State University in Georgia, showed in his research that no one died. Dr. Christine Hall in Canada, one of your physicians on the western side of Canada, conducted research as well on over 1 million cases and found that no one had died.
Wow.
Because weight was put on the back. So it's controversial. Plaintiffs like to bring it up. They like to cite Dr. Ray's study, but Dr. Ray's study has been invalidated. No one who is in the scientific community puts much weight, no pun intended, on that study. So,
even if a study is invalidated, I guess it's still got some value because at least it got people talking about something. Like, you have to test the ideas. So it's like the study can't be relied upon, but it's still, is credit still given for like getting people down a certain path of thinking?
Well, I think that's right, Nathan. I think that's a good point. Dr. Ray had a couple of people come into his morgue. He was the King County medical examiner at the time, and King County surrounds Seattle, as many people know. And he had a couple of people come into his morgue who had been, quote, hogtied and put face down. And he looked into this. Now, what's interesting is, and this is where the scientific community, I think, needed to step up more and didn't until later, several years later, actually. But his sample size was only about 12 people. And scientifically, that would be called a pilot study. That would not be called a study that we could rely on.
Yeah.
The people in that study were very healthy. They weren't the type of people we find on the street. And that's another variable in this situation. The critics of excited delirium, the critics of positional asphyxia say, look, the studies that have been done laboratory-wise, scientifically, haven't included people that we deal with on the street. They're not amped up on fentanyl, methamphetamine, cocaine, whatever. That's true. And that's a big limitation of those studies. However, the clinical research, what I call clinical research, has actually been done in the field. And Dr. Hall and Dr. Ross and a few others have done that. Those people were hopped up on methamphetamine and cocaine. And these are the people we deal with every day. And again, there still doesn't show anything inherently dangerous with those positions. However, some people do die, and what's called an alpha level in research, which is the probability of something unlikely occurring, is usually at 95%. That still leaves a window of 5% that could be a person who dies, generally not from the position. It's usually from either some type of pre-existing condition, could be sudden cardiac arrest, or it could be the drugs on board. So it's still controversial, even though the scientific weight really is on the scale of it's not considered a lethal position.
Okay. So when I was looking up excited delirium before we had this discussion, most definitions that I was able to find kind of it's very simple, and I imagine the concept is not simple, but it's just a state of extreme agitation. Now, I mean, you've already talked about a whole bunch of factors that go into a lot of these things, and obviously there's controversy around excited delirium, what it is, or whether it should be recognized. Can you kind of give us a sense of, like, how the term was used? Has it been used inappropriately, and where things kind of lie now with it?
Sure. Historically, we've traced the term back to 1798 in the published literature.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
A lot of people think Taser International, former Taser International, coined that term, but they didn't.
Okay.
This term goes back to 1798, and we have a thorough literature review from 1798 up to current times. Every time that we have found it used in the literature, in the manner in which it was described, that we would use it in law enforcement. Now, there are some terms that have been used, like delirium excited, or they say the person experienced excited delirium, and then they go on to explain he was just happy and what have you. Well, that's not the term definition that we would apply to law enforcement. So the term's been around for a long time, and in the 1600s, there's a medical notebook, if you will, that was published. And in that, it was a medical doctor, a traveling medical doctor around England, who he took notes on every one of his patients, and he did it by day and by area and what have you. And he actually described the phenomenon of excited delirium with a countrywoman, as he called it, where one minute she was happy, the next minute she just went crazy, and her husband had to put her in bed and tie her down with ropes. And the next day she died. And that's a type of behavior that we often see in the field. Now, if someone has the behavioral characteristics, and I'll go into those in a minute, of what here in the United States we used to refer to as excited delirium, those characteristics have been pretty consistent through time. There really hasn't been much change. The change has been the political landscape, and to some degree the scientific landscape, because excited delirium, the term itself, is not a recognized medical or psychological diagnosis.
Mhm.
You won't find it in the DSM-5 or 4 or 3, which is the diagnostic manual from the American Psychological Association, nor will you find it in the ICD-10, which is the International Classification of Disease Manual used by doctors. It's not in there. But what is in both of those documents is the term delirium. And there's also a term called hyperactive delirium. And hyperactive delirium has the same characteristics of what we call excited delirium. So it's really a label issue, in my opinion. The behaviors are there. But over the years, excited delirium has been scientifically reviewed. There are peer-reviewed publications about excited delirium. Dr. Deborah Mash has written a bunch of things on that. The late Stephen Karch, Dr. Karch, wrote several things about it. I mean, scientifically and from their research, it's been proven to exist. The problem is that probably since 2008, 9, or 10 here in the United States, many people were too quick to point to a behavior or a sudden death or an associated death in law enforcement and go, oh, that was excited delirium. That was excited delirium. Well, they don't know. The autopsy wasn't performed yet.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the term got used so much in so many situations that the plaintiff's bar here in the United States associated itself many times with various human rights groups and medical groups and said, wait a minute, there's no scientific diagnosis called excited delirium. You guys are using this to cover up police brutality, to cover up whatever. And that's what I think started to erode the term, even though there's scientific proof that that phenomenon exists. We at our training firm have always said it's a descriptive phrase.
Yeah.
It's not a medical diagnosis. It's just a descriptive phrase. The same as you would say that's a car or that's a Chevy versus a Ford. It's a descriptive phrase. That's all it is.
I was saying just before we started recording how, I just finished my set of days, so just worked the last 4 days. And I think I heard the term excited delirium about 4 times on the radio. And it does seem to be just what you're saying. It's just a way for people to describe something they're seeing in front of them. And it's, instead of just saying someone's acting crazy, we kind of have like an image in our head of what excited delirium is. Because, I mean, there's tons of videos on social media of people acting completely erratic, irrational, might be stripping the clothes off. They're sweating profusely. So it instantly gives you an image, and, maybe sometimes it's exaggerated, but as law enforcement, I'm not given a medical diagnosis. So even if people don't want law enforcement to use it or don't agree with that, I just wonder, what does that matter? Because in the end, an autopsy is going to get done, especially on an in custody death. So just wait for the autopsy, and whatever the medical examiner, whoever's given that judgment, it's going to fall on them to say what it was.
Well, exactly. And I think in your country, people are a little more civilized when it comes to officer-associated deaths than here in the United States. People want answers immediately down here, and everybody's thinking about litigation and winning the litigation lottery and making millions of dollars and so on and so forth. So I think there's some pressure, particularly on law enforcement executives, to come out and say something, when in fact, many times they do need to say something, but stay away from what it might have been or what it could have been until we really know. So I think your point's a very good one. Let's wait for the medical examiner to rule on, the cause, manner, and mechanism of death. The other thing here in the United States, and it may also be true in Canada, here in the U.S., when we have an associated death with law enforcement, generally it's referred to and classified as a homicide. But a medical examiner's definition of homicide simply means death at the hands of another. It does not mean that the person caused the death.
Yeah.
It is just associated with the death. But the public, and it's mostly the naivete of the American citizen here in our country, they don't know the difference. They don't know the definitional difference. So they hear the word homicide and they go, the cop killed him. Well, let's go get the cop.
I could see how that's a problem.
Yeah, that's a real problem down here. So the term itself, as I mentioned, is just a label, and we moved away from it in 2010 because we heard officers in reports, because we get reports and we read them, they use the term excited delirium, and we thought, they're almost making a diagnosis at that point. So we use the term agitated chaotic event, or ACE. And we've since disposed of that term based on the litigation and the statutory changes here in the United States regarding excited delirium. The whole landscape has changed here in the US when it comes to excited delirium. And this is a fairly recent change in the last couple of years. And California led the way on this. There was a death in California, and excited delirium was used, and some state legislators went to the California legislature and got a criminal statute passed that mostly focuses on positional asphyxia.
Okay.
But it also includes language that police officers in California, also in Colorado, Minnesota, have all passed these statutes. You cannot utter the term excited delirium in court. You cannot put it in a police report. You cannot use it in training. You can't use it at all unless you're referring to some historical reference.
Jeez.
So in effect, it's been statutorily banned in those 3 states, and there are several other states with pending litigation just like it. What's concerning to me about some of this is it's not based on any science. It's a knee-jerk reaction to a couple associated deaths. But a couple of the states have gone so far as to eliminate recognized diagnoses, such as hyperactive delirium. It's banned. You can't use it. So that puts the medical community in a real hardship.
Yeah.
But more importantly, the National Association of Medical Examiners here in the United States has abandoned the term excited delirium. So people who are listening to this podcast may say, well, I don't live in California, I don't live in Colorado, I don't live in Minnesota, it doesn't affect me. Yes, it does, because the National Association of Medical Examiners no longer use it. So if officers put it in their report and the medical examiners have stopped using it, you've created a real confrontation right off the bat.
And
so it's real dicey down here.
I was just going to say, it's the usual suspects when it comes to law enforcement. It's California, Denver, and or Colorado and Minnesota. But those got to be the hardest places to be a cop. So the language is changing. I never understood this. Is if the politicians are going to chase certain words, it's like, well, we could just keep changing the words, or So what are the medical community? What are they calling it now? And then what are police supposed to call it?
Well, that's a good question. The medical community should rely on the diagnoses in the ICD-10, the International Classification of Disease. That's what they should rely on. So should the medical examiners. But unlike other experts here in the United States, we have our Rule 702. We have federal rules of evidence. We have federal rules regarding expert reports. Medical examiners are not held to those rules. So they can write whatever they want. For example, they can say, oh, this is positional asphyxia associated with delirium. That's their opinion. Well, okay, what do you have to back that up? They don't have to put that in their medical autopsy reports.
Yeah.
They're not held to the same standard in federal court as another expert witness. And this creates problems too, because we have some rather progressive medical examiners who don't believe in some of the science, and they pick and choose the science they want to apply to their particular situation. Now, there's a doctor in Southern California who has developed a theory and I want to emphasize the word theory.
Okay.
It's just a theory. And his theory is that people who fight the police, many of them have pre-existing conditions. Many of them have illegal drugs on board. Many of them may even have legal drugs on board, and they took too many or didn't take enough. And as they struggle with the police and continue to struggle, they suddenly have a cardiac arrest, and that kills them. I particularly find his theory plausible because I think that explains quite a bit. And in that theory that the person has a sudden cardiac arrest and dies, that eliminates any reference to excited delirium, other agitated conditions, positional asphyxia. I mean, he wiped out a lot of potential causes there. And I particularly like his particular approach to it.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I think it sounds like excited delirium is just like a very easy term to say there's a lot going on. So basically, we're just moving to I guess, a way of describing. We're just going to have to be more descriptive and say, well, it looks like there's these, on the medical side anyways, not for law enforcement, but they're just going to have to say, it looks like these 10 different things were going on here, and there's a ton of contributing factors, and maybe we can't even say exactly which one killed a person.
Well, that's a pretty good assessment. There's always a constellation of factors. There's many things that may impact this. The problem, not the problem, a problem we have here in the United States is when a medical examiner puts down history of restraint as part of the contributing conditions. And what they mean by history of restraint is the person was restrained. That's all. Because the person's now deceased, so everything that happened to that person is history.
Oh, okay, I see.
So the terminology they use is history of restraint. Well, what many times happens is people seize that and they go, well, he was restrained. That's what killed him. And they make that leap, and you just can't do that, but they do. And that complicates things too. Because of all this statutory change and the medical examiners here in America going away from the term excited delirium, we took a very broad approach to this whole concept, and we based a new approach on a United States Supreme Court case here in the United States called Graham versus Connor, which was a seminal case that pretty much defined a police officer's use of force. And in that case, part of the language said it's what the officer perceives, not what he or she may know.
Yeah.
Now, they may know something too, but it's the perception. And so we've developed an approach called perceived unusual behaviors, or what's called PUB, because most police officers clearly understand the word pub. So it fit pretty well. But what we've also done is we went out and conducted a very thorough medical and psychological literature review. And what we found when you're talking about unusual behaviors, there's many more behaviors that are associated than with excited delirium. So taking this approach, we have a much bigger net now to identify these behaviors. But with that also comes some limitations, because what the officer may perceive may not be reality. For example, two people on a corner rehearsing for a play, and one has a toy knife and is attacking the other one. Well, that's perceived as maybe a criminal offense, but in reality, they're rehearsing for a play. So in our program now, we talk about all these additional unusual behaviors and caution everybody, yes, it may look that way, but you've really got to establish what it is to the best of your ability. And we have totally, well, like I mentioned earlier, since 2010, we've moved away from the term excited delirium. Now we've moved away from that whole concept, basically, and attached it to a psychological footprint for the most part, and also medical footprint on unusual behavior.
So do you think, I guess if you're moving away from the terminology, there's not even there's no reason to even try and get any of these recognized in those I forget the acronym there, the DSM and the other journal.
Right, the ICD.
Yeah, so there's no real point in even worrying about those anymore, I guess, because if the courts or the lawyers can just take, any kind of science they want and then just spin it a certain way, because there's no point in fighting to get something recognized through that, is there?
I think it would be a very uphill battle. And I think you're very perceptive on that. First of all, the American public, most people are not schooled in the science. They don't understand science.
Yeah.
So you're talking to people in a jury who really don't understand science, and you have a plaintiff's lawyer, in many cases, who really did his or her research and homework, and they're throwing things at this jury that the defense just can't keep up with. Many defense lawyers, unfortunately, don't do their homework. And they come into trial and they think they got this thing pretty well under control, and they don't even understand the concept. And they may understand the legal concepts, but they don't understand the science. Because many lawyers will tell you, I went to law school because I didn't like math.
Yeah.
So, they're not into science and doing calculations and doing research and all of that. So that's not everyone. We work with a lot of good defense lawyers who are really up to speed on this, but they've had these cases before. And the key in many of these cases with the opposing expert is to really sit down and depose them. Have a lawyer who's very skilled in all these phenomena, knows the science, and then goes after these folks in a deposition and basically shows how shallow their opinions are. When that happens, yes, then there's usually success. But most attorneys are so busy, they don't have the time to do that kind of background.
Yeah, we experience the same thing up here. I mean, we get all kinds of trials that get tossed out because they just don't have time. And you're like, wow. And like serious assaults in different matters. Then you're expecting someone to do background research for you and to defend you or put your case forward, and that doesn't happen. So I'm wondering too, like, so with your business and doing the expert witness side of things, where do you come into the equation, and what type of I imagine you're doing stuff all across America. Can you talk a little bit about just where you fit within the picture and what an expert witness might bring to this situation?
Well, let's start with what I don't bring to the situation.
Okay.
I'm not a medical doctor. So in the United States, I'm not allowed to offer opinions that are medical. I'm also not a lawyer, so I can't offer opinions that are legal. Those are two of the big exclusions under our rules here in the United States. But where I think there is a role, from the training perspective, education and training is important. And it needs to be continuous. It needs to be ongoing. And I think coming in and updating people about, okay, let's take a much different look at this. Let's look at this through a different lens. Let's look at this as unusual behaviors. And here is a whole laundry list, if you will, of unusual behaviors and how they can be created. Many times in the past, people associated unusual behavior with illegal drugs, but it can be legal drugs too. It can be mental illness. It can be a special needs person, someone, let's say, with autism, or a Down person, someone with Down syndrome, someone with epilepsy. An epileptic seizure can manifest itself in many of the same things that we've associated over the years with other behaviors. But it's not mental illness, it's a medical condition.
Mm-hmm.
So we try to, in the training program, expand on that and really educate people about, look, this is not a one-trick pony here. There can be many, many causes. There can be many underlying conditions. And your job is not to diagnose any of those or even to think what the cause might be. Your job is to capture, control, and restrain the person and then transport them.
I'll jump in there too, because I mean, the public definitely doesn't see it that simple. they literally think
right.
I should be standing there and within like 5 seconds have like a full analysis in my own mind of how I should negotiate with this person who's got, who knows, it could be legal, not legal drugs, mental health, all this other stuff going on. And you're like, my job is to prevent people from dying and destruction. And then after that, it's all these other systems. It's all your jobs. So
that's right. And just to add to that, because that's an excellent point, many times the people who call the police have exhausted all their opportunities to calm down their family member or their neighbor or somebody else.
The adults have lost control. So who do you call?
Yeah.
Yes.
And so now they're reaching out to other humans to say, do something that I couldn't do as a human. Well, that doesn't always work. And a lot of times you're looking for cooperation. And if the person's, in a mind-body disconnect, if you will, they're not thinking rationally. Who knows what's going on in their head? And, people who have voices in their head and the voices tell them what to do, many times the public kind of laughs that off and goes, oh, come on, that doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we have a course on how to handle emotionally disturbed people. And part of that course is we have people put headphones on with a repeat message. We tape record a message and it says, kill the person. They're lying. Don't believe them. They're lying.
Mm-hmm.
Kill them. We've had nobody in class be willing to wear that headset for more than 5 minutes.
Oh, really?
Drives them crazy. They go, I can't even think. I go, okay, that's what people were hearing. So now you're experiencing a little bit of what they're experiencing. You get a different appreciation for it.
I was listening to a recent podcast with Jordan Peterson. He was talking to somebody who's like an expert on brains. He just put it out a couple of weeks ago, but the stuff they were talking about, it is right along the lines of what you're saying, and just how people can't grasp the amount of stuff that can go on in your head. And some of the things they were talking about in theirs was just wild. And I was like, I've never even heard of this happening, but people who are getting like paralyzed and they can't move their body when they're laying in bed, but they're fully conscious of surroundings. And I was like, boy, if I showed up as a police officer and something to that level is going on with somebody, like, what am I supposed to do with that? Like, I don't know how to diagnose that. I'm just looking at what's in front of me and make sure they're not hurting themselves or somebody else. Like, it's pretty crazy.
Well, you're right. And I think what the law enforcement profession needs to do, and it's happening in some areas, we need to reassess what officers' expectations are in the field.
Yes.
You're right. We're not mental health people. We're not psychologists. We're not medical doctors. And there comes a point where I think historically we tried to be everything to everybody, and now we have to say, okay, stop. This is where I stop. I have to call EMS. I have to call some social intervention person to come in. I can't do this. All I have to do, as you said earlier, is keep the peace, make sure people are safe, including the person who's acting out. And sometimes that's where it goes crazy too, because you're trying to protect the person and they decide consciously or unconsciously that they're going to do something that now requires police intervention. And sometimes that has a bad outcome through no fault of the officer. And sometimes through the fault of the officer. I mean, I think we have to admit there are rogue officers out there.
Mm-hmm.
there are guys and ladies out there who probably shouldn't have been hired and shouldn't have been kept on the force. But fortunately, that's very, 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 very small percentage-wise.
Yeah.
So I think most of these behaviors that we see in the associated deaths are not through any fault of the officer at all. But people today don't want to take accountability and responsibility for their actions. They want to blame somebody else.
Yeah.
And law enforcement's a great target.
Yeah, we're always in the middle of everything, right? I mean, we're in the middle of the protests where both sides want to kill each other, and we're just standing in the middle of it trying to keep the peace. But we'll become the punching bags for all the rhetoric out there. Also on that, like when you're saying like we have to have that kind of that examination of like what our function is as law enforcement. I mean, definitely have to include the politicians in that, because they're the ones who set a lot of those narratives that are out there. They got the biggest microphone. I think it too on that is it's not hard to find a lot of these statistics, at least in the US. This is one of my gripes here in Canada is we don't generally do a good job of keeping the stats of like use of force and the results that come from that. We have some, but it's not like down south. So we generally have to reference like FBI studies or other agencies, like the bigger ones like NYPD or someone that has, I guess, the budget to do that. But when you look at the use of force stuff, there's it's like every time they show it, it's like 0.0001% end up in some serious injury or a death. And that's out of millions of interactions in a year or whatever time period that you're taking from. So I think it's not hard to disprove a lot of the narratives that are out there. But for some reason, people just really lack the spine to do it. And I don't get why. Like it doesn't seem like such a hard argument to disprove some of that stuff. But yeah, as you were saying.
Well, I think you're absolutely right on that. And I think it's going to get more and more difficult for administrators to justify why they don't track statistics, particularly with the advent of artificial intelligence. AI can track those numbers and put them all together in seconds or minutes. And we do a lot of work in artificial intelligence as well. Those days of, well, I couldn't do that are over. I mean, you just give it to AI and it'll happen. But you're absolutely right. When you look at the millions of police interactions, and then you break that into the number of interactions that involve a use of force, here in the U.S., we're looking at, maybe 1.5% to 2% that might require some force.
Mm-hmm.
And most of that force is handcuffing.
That's a good point, though. And I want to emphasize that because the use of force, when you're saying use of force, that's not, I think people instantly think use of force, gun, they shot somebody.
Right.
It's like, no, that 1% to 2% is all of it. Like even the lowest amount of force, like just pulling somebody's arm. And then within that 1%, we're going even smaller to any sort of lethal or something that's considered less lethal.
Well, you're absolutely right. And in Canada, you have a distinct advantage over the United States in that your laws pretty much apply to everybody across Canada. From province to province, the use of force stuff really doesn't change. Here in the United States, we have 50 states that have their own use of force law. Plus, we have the Supreme Court that talks about use of force. So what may go well in Arkansas, the officer may find himself in trouble in Montana.
Yeah.
In the same situation. So my experience, and I've taught at the OPP, and I've taught out in British Columbia, and I've over in the Niagara Falls area. I've been around the country a little bit, and we've trained a lot of folks from Canada over the years. That's one advantage I think you guys have that we don't have, because we're not a, quote, national police force, unquote, in the sense of one rule applies to everybody.
Yeah.
Because every department has its own policies, procedures, interpretations, definitions, and
yeah. there is something to be said for the standardization to a degree. But up here, I've said this a ton of times, and this comes across in all different discussions I've had. But when you compare the US and Canada, it's like the US likes to play at the extremes. They'll go 90-10 on certain topics, and Canada's always like 60-40. And we just ride the US wave because the majority of our media is American. A lot of the news and different things that you see, it's American. TV shows are American. So like even the influence you see through some of the messaging in everything from sitcoms to dramas or movies, there's a lot of influence there. But we just kind of ride the wave back and forth. And then we'll drop off at like that 60 point. And then you guys keep going. And then when you come back, when the pendulum comes back, you pick us up and you bring us back to the other side. And but we see a lot of the similar narratives, very similar with our politicians, with the media up here, even the groups. So we have a lot of independent review boards that will look at like serious allegations of use of force or in custody deaths. And you get a different flavor based on the province that you're in. Some provinces up here are, I don't want to say anti-police isn't the word. I'm trying to think of the right term. They're just maybe
More progressive.
more progressive. Yeah, I guess we'll call it that. But you're like, wow, in this province, you'd probably be fine. And they would say like, hey, we went through the rationale here and we looked at the science and we did whatever we had to do. And we say this officer's justified. And you go to the next province and you're like, oh boy, like that's not going to fly over there because of all these, whoever they've put on the board, who's backing that person. And it's funny, this also comes into play when we talk about like civilian oversight. And I'm a little critical of that because it's like, so they talk about like, if we just have police in there, you have the thin blue line and it's the blue veil or the wall. And it's like, there's, cops will admit when there's bad cops and they don't want them in the service just as much as anybody else. Just putting civilians in there though, now you have a person who, like you said, when you have a jury, they don't know this context at all. They've never had to use force at all. But we're expecting them to be the critical judge on this. And I just find it's like, well, I don't know if I really buy that. And they too can also befriend people and all of a sudden be friendly with police. Like they have relationships outside. So I just, I don't know if there's a perfect answer. We have certain things up here that appear to work a little better, but we do have our problems as well. So
a lot of that also comes down to like John was saying, is it's a matter of perception. And between the jury and the the civilian oversight. And I didn't mention it in the introduction. I've known John Peters since like 81, 82, when he was whooping my ass at the Smith & Wesson Academy a long time ago, which is that's a story in itself. But back then he said something that has obviously stuck with me to this day. And he was originally talking about it in connection with police officers and the lack of training that the community had back in the early 80s. But John said to me that believe it or not, in the presence of an absence of training, a lot of law enforcement personnel are going to go with stuff that they saw on television in the movies. And the thing is, it's like you're now also starting to see that in the case of the civilian oversight and with people on jury duty, where all they know about police procedure and use of force is what they saw on an episode of NCIS Los Angeles or Law and Order or Chicago PD, something like that, which is like completely unrealistic. And basically that I believe that colors their perceptions.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're right, John. In fact, there are many judges here in the United States that when they charge a jury to go and deliberate, they will tell those jurors something called the NCIS effect. They'll say, you may think that we need DNA in this case. You may think that we need this or that scientific evidence. We don't have it. We don't do that in every case. And jurors believe that. And tying that, what you said, John, back to Nathan's point, we're supposed to be evaluated by our peers, a jury of our peers. Well, usually there's no law enforcement on a civilian oversight board or in a jury. So where are our peers? That's like having, someone 24 years old evaluate whether a medical doctor did the surgery correctly or not. They have to rely only on the evidence that the court allows to come in.
Yeah.
And I don't know of a better system, I must admit, but there are some, I think, questionable flaws in this one. And we just have to live with it. But TV is enormous. It has an enormous impact on people, as do movies. And of course, I think something we can't dismiss is when we have a really bad situation, like the beating to death of people by officers for no apparent reason. Clearly, every officer in the country would say that's bad. They shouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
That's what gets publicized. That's what people remember the most. And one thing that we tell our students today, which shocks many of them, to be a licensed barber, someone who cuts hair here in the United States, on average, they get 1,500 hours of training before they qualify as a barber. That's way more than police officers get.
Mm-hmm.
And police officers do a lot more than cut hair.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it's incumbent upon administrators to really push training and education for their folks. But budget constraints, they don't want people to be at the academy too long. They don't want this. They don't want that. Well, look at some of the other countries. Look at some of the training that other law enforcement goes through around the world.
Mm-hmm.
It really makes what we're looking pretty simple here in the U.S. And police training in the U.S. is mostly governed state by state. And, some people get updates and some don't. And then you have the issues, as you mentioned, Nathan, about the provinces. Different provinces may focus on different things. We have that here in our federal district courts,
mm-hmm.
where the Fifth Circuit may be very conservative and the Ninth Circuit may be very liberal. So what would work and nobody even blink an eye at in, say, Louisiana, California may lock them up. So
yeah.
We have a case right now going before the Supreme Court that should be decided by June. It's called the Barnes case. And it's going to be a game changer. And for your listeners, they need to be following this, whether they're in Canada or whether in the U.S., because it's really going to be impactful. And the Barnes case simply says, when an officer uses force, particularly deadly force, must you look at all the events leading up to that, or just look at the moment the force was used?
I think I've heard about this. Yeah, this will be huge.
Depending which way it goes, it's really going to create a tsunami of legal issues. So, but that should be out by June of this year here in the U.S.
Even though Canada has its own, some of its own rules and the way certain things work, I'd be hard pressed to believe that judges and others here in the legal system don't pay attention to what's going on in the world. And some of that, whether it colors their decision making or thought process, I mean, it still gives them a thought. and maybe when they're in a position to make a, you know, a ruling on something or give an opinion, that doesn't come out in that in some way, right? So yeah, it's we're very intertwined and closely related in a lot more ways than I think some people might realize. So we're just coming up to the end of our time. I want to make sure give you some time just to talk about what you got on the go right now. Any projects? I know you travel a ton, so what's happening with you, and then also where can people find your work, and where do they go to follow you?
Well, probably the easiest way to take a look at what we're doing is go to our website, which is www.icd.com. We're reimagining our institute right now. We're creating centers. We're going to have a center, for example, of officer-associated and in-custody deaths, and that center will only focus on those subjects. We have another one on the Center of Excellence for Artificial Intelligence, because AI is already penetrated law enforcement and everything else across the country.
Yeah.
We have a center for expert witness and that type of thing. We have a lot of articles on our website. And if somebody needs an article that and they don't find it on the site, just drop me an email, and we'll be glad to look up that for you. And if it's not a copyright issue, we'll be glad to send that off to you. We have a couple research projects underway here at the Institute. One of them is the electronic glove that is gaining wider acceptance here in the United States. It's not like a taser or anything like that. It won't knock you down. It's basically an assist. If you have a person, you can activate the glove. You wear it just like a glove, and it produces an electrical shock that will take you down and hopefully hold you there as well. But the officer has to be involved in it. So it involves defensive tactics and the use of the glove. And Dr. Del Ross and I are doing an evaluation on the effectiveness of that glove at the current time.
Okay.
We just finished a big study on artificial intelligence and its use in law enforcement. And Dr. John Black and I are putting that together right now. We hope to have that ready for publication in about 90 days. And then finally, we have a research project on lesson plans. And what we're finding on lesson plans is the issue in court today, at least in the United States, and I would presume in Canada as well, is one of how do you prove the officer was competent to do what he or she did? And it all goes back to the lesson plan. And within that lesson plan, it goes to how you determine competency, and it must be determined quantitatively.
Okay.
You can't say, okay, attendance equals competence, because nobody tested you. But we have a lot of agencies here in the U.S. that attendance in their mind equals competence. So it goes back to the lesson plan and how that lesson plan is structured, and we're evaluating the performance measures of lesson plans, and we have a couple hundred that we've reviewed. And I don't have the exact percentage yet, but I can tell you that the very vast majority of them do not have any competency testing standards at all, particularly in the area of psychomotor skills. Officers will tell you, oh, I evaluated. The instructor will say, I evaluated the person. Okay, show me how. And they'll say, well, it's pass fail. Okay, what's the number? Well, I just told you it's pass fail. I get that, but there has to be a number that says pass and below it is fail. Oh, we don't have that. Well, then how do you know? Well, I know.
Because they never fail anybody.
Yeah, that may be part of it. So we have those projects underway, and we're always looking to do other research as well. And then, of course, our expert witness practice, along with our training, really keeps us in touch with what's going on in the landscape out there. And we've been very fortunate to have been doing that a long time. And I'll be with the California Force Instructors Group at their annual conference over in Napa, California this year, participating in a panel there. And I would recommend to anybody who's interested in use of force to check out the California Force Instructors Association. It says California, but they have members all over the world. And they really provide some really good training, some really good updates, and I think people would find that worthwhile.
Excellent.
Cool. And one thing I did want to ask you when you're speaking of your centers of excellence is also the Are you going to have a COE for the different certification programs that you offer?
Yes,
because I know because I wanted to bring that to everybody's attention, because you offer certifications in like spit mask and a number of other things, and if you could just address that.
Sure. Probably what would be of real interest to all the podcast listeners, if you go to our website, we have a online training center, and we have it's a perfect police price, tuition-free breathing program. Because a lot of officers do not understand how important breathing is when they're dealing with people. What's agonal breathing? What's compromised breathing? What's this, that, and the other? So we have a 30-minute, roughly, program, maybe more toward 45. It's totally free. At the end, you take a very basic online test, and you get your certificate. So it is a certificate-based program. Many of the programs we offer are instructor level, where we train the trainers who then go back to their agencies. And we're putting more and more of those up online this year because of travel budgets and everything else. So we're putting them up online. And we have a spit restraint device instructor program on spit restraint devices. We have a how to recognize and manage abnormal breathing instructor program. Our flagship program on officer-associated deaths and pub will be going up shortly. So I would encourage people to, stop by our website on a frequent basis and find out what's new and exciting and what we have up there.
And we keep on talking about the lack of time and money for training and basically for supervisors to conduct training. One of the free certifications that they offer is it's a micro lesson instructor certification, which I've taken myself, and I can recommend it very highly. And it's all done online, and you get feedback from the instructors, and you actually develop your programs and share them at a Google forum, and it's really worth looking into, especially when you're strapped for time on, geez, how am I going to train these guys to do X?
Yeah. Okay. Very cool. I appreciate you guys being on here today. I want to say, it's a unique topic, and definitely one that I think this discussion will enlighten a lot of people, both sides of the border. But we'll have to get you on again, because especially with the lesson plans, talking about whether an officer is competent, I think that's a really good topic. So I'm curious how that study will turn out. So we'll have to get you back in here.
Yeah, I'd love to do it. And you're right. It'll get some people excited. No doubt about it.
All right, guys. Thank you very much. I'm just going to shut the recording down here, but hang in there for 2 seconds. Hey, everyone. Thanks for listening in and following along with the discussions. Be sure to click the follow or subscribe button on your respective listening platform. Also, check out the Quiet Professional on X and Instagram under TQP780. And most importantly, please share where you can. Everyone has a part to play in getting these education and information pieces out there, so pass it along. Thanks again.